This message is another in the series of bad interpretations where we look at common problems that people have in understanding what Revelation and all prophecy are having by misunderstanding what prophecy is or how prophecy works. And today we're going to look at problems with describing future realities and how that really works and how people misunderstand that. So describing future realities, obviously Revelation, especially in Daniel and others at times, talk about future realities and they describe them. And the common misperception that people have is that the prophet himself is describing a future reality, something that he sees. So they think that the prophet sees events in our reality, so that'd be in cars, airplanes, missiles, etc. But he doesn't understand those things, even how they work likely. And so because he doesn't understand them, he doesn't have the words to describe it. And that would be the same as us trying to describe things in heaven, for example. We don't understand those and we just don't have the words to describe those kind of things. And so the idea is that he doesn't have the words to describe it and he does the best he can with what he understands from his own reality. So he might compare things to trees or to houses or to other things if they look like that. But prophecy doesn't work that way. Prophecy is always God creates the words of the prophecy and he gives them to the prophet and the prophet delivers them. And I talked about that in one of our earlier messages called the prophet's experience. If you want to look at that, that'd be good. I'll put a link up here. So the prophet is only the person who receives and delivers the message from God. He doesn't make up the words that we see. God is much too concerned that the words say exactly what he wants to say to entrust that to a prophet. And so the prophet is not the one who creates the words. And critical to understand that. So mostly prophecy describes future realities by the meanings of things from a current reality transposed into a future reality. And we're going to use an example that's going to help you to understand that because it's not really straightforward. But everything in your life has a meaning, or almost everything in your life has some kind of meaning to you. And that meaning in your current reality is what God uses to explain things in a future reality. And that's the way almost all prophecy works. I only know of one place where God describes the appearance of something in the future. So whenever you're looking at prophecy, your best bet is to think of things in terms of meanings from a current reality. And as I said, we'll explain that right away here. So in the Sixth Trumpet of Revelation, there's a section on horses and horsemen. And this picture shows you what God is describing. But he doesn't describe it as a physical thing like you would do it. He describes it in this way. He talks about it being a horse. Okay, what does a horse mean to a person from first century? A horse is the fastest way to travel great distances. And there's nothing faster than a horse. They just don't know of any other way to get around faster than that. So he uses a horse to indicate this thing travels fast. And then the horse has a horseman, which means it's not just the horse going off by himself, it's being controlled by someone. There's someone driving the horse around, steering the horse. And that makes sense in terms of this. And God describes it as having a head like a lion. Well, you don't see anything like a lion head on this image, but he's making a point with that. The meaning of a lion to a person in the first century is that a lion is a fearsome, ferocious, dangerous thing. They are killers. They are life-threatening. And so that's the meaning of a lion in that time. Well, it's the meaning of a lion in our time, too. And so God also speaks about this thing, the mouth of it emitting fire, brimstone, and smoke. And so a lion kills with its mouth. And so we're talking about this thing kills, and it kills with fire, brimstone, and smoke. And we know what that means because we know that this is talking about a nuclear weapon being delivered through an air vehicle. And so we know that that's talking about a bright light and burning rock and mushroom cloud, those sorts of things we understand once we understand what the picture is that's being described here. But it isn't described as a mushroom cloud or that sort of thing. It's using things that people understood. People understood fire, they understood smoke, and they understood brimstone, which we really don't understand. In our time, brimstone is burning sulfur, burning rock. So all of these things are being described in that way. What does it mean to a person in the time of the prophet? So and it says, another thing God says about this thing that we see in the picture is its power comes from its tail and from its mouth. And so we know that that's exactly true. A jet engine makes it go fast. That's what gives it its power, is its speed. The mouth brings destruction. We know that the weapon inside of it is what destroys and kills people. So this is the way God describes things. What do these things mean to the prophet in his time, and translating those into our time, and that translation isn't easy. But he's not describing it physically. He's not describing physical characteristics, and that's so important to understand here, that God very rarely describes the physical characteristics or appearance of something. So turn that question around the other way. If the prophet was the one who actually saw this thing with his own eyes, or within a vision, and he described it in his own words, how would he describe a cruise missile? He would describe it, well, the first thing he would notice is it's flying in the air, and that would be just shocking to him, because no prophet that ever wrote in the Bible knew of anything that flew in the air. They're just the only birds flew in the air. There was never a time when anything man-made flew in the air. And so that'd be the first thing the prophet would describe. He would say, this thing's flying in the air. And he would also describe it in terms that he understood. It looks like a black tree with flat branches. So he's trying to do some sort of a physical description, but we don't see that in the Bible. He would also probably notice the markings on it. So he would describe that as there was some kind of a design painted on the tree. And maybe he would even focus on that bright white star there, and he would say, it was a 5-pointed star. Now, he knows 6-pointed stars. He's going to know the Star of David, and so he's going to know what a 6-pointed star is, but he's going to say, look, this is a 5-pointed star. This is different. And so he's going to note that because it makes difference to him. And so then he would later on describe it as having a really bright light that just overwhelmed everything. And then he's going to describe this mushroom-shaped cloud that came out of the bright light. And he's going to describe the aftermath of flattened houses and flattened buildings, and a landscape that is now barren that was once populated. So if a prophet saw these things with his own eyes and described it in his own words, he would describe it completely differently from God's description that we saw on the previous slide. And so this is important to understand, that we are not, the prophet is not seeing future reality, and he's not describing it in his own words. He is being given words by God to give to people, and God is the one who does all the descriptions, and mostly God's descriptions are based on meanings of things in the time of the prophet. So as an exercise here, we're going to go through the fifth trumpet. The fifth trumpet talks about something symbolically, and so I'm going to read through these 2 slides here and give you a chance to apply this understanding yourself and see what you can do with it. So Revelation 9 verses 3 through 6. And from the smoke locusts went out over the earth, and power was given to them which the scorpions of earth have. And it was told them not to harm the grass of earth, neither any greenery, nor the trees, but only the people who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. And it was given to them not to kill them, but that they would suffer pain for 5 months. And their torment was like the torment of a scorpion when it attacks a man. And in those days people will seek death and will not find it, and they will long to die, and death will flee from them. And the form of the locusts was like the form of horses prepared for battle, and upon their heads as crowns of the likeness of gold, and their faces were like the faces of men. And they had hair like hair of women, and their teeth were like those of lions. And they had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was like the sound of the chariots of many horses running to battle. And they had tails like scorpions, and a sting in their tails, and their authority is to hurt people for 5 months. And there is a king over them, the angel of the abyss, whose name is in Hebrew is Abidu, and in Aramaic his name is Sharai. So that's the verses from Revelation 9 that is describing something. Okay? So people have looked at this, and many people have looked at this and come to the same conclusion, that this is describing helicopters. They see the mention of wings, the sounds like chariots and helicopters. What you can sort of think of that as making a sound like a chariot. They have tails. Helicopters have tails. There are faces of people that are seen, and yes, they have pilots in the helicopter, so maybe that's talking about them. And so people have commonly come to the idea that this is helicopters. But you have to say, okay, and this is something I talked about in an earlier message, is the necessity of explaining the whole thing. If you just take a few pieces out of it and say, these pieces line up with this idea, and you ignore all the rest of it, you've really just deceived yourself. And so if these are helicopters, what are they doing? Can you explain the rest of it? What is the scorpion sting? And what are the 5 months of wanting to die? And people saying that they want to die, and death runs away from them and they can't die. what is that saying? And you need to understand and explain more than just these few things make it sound like helicopters. What are the helicopters doing here that explains the rest of it? And helicopters, by the way, is not correct. That's wrong. And the problem here, again, as I said before, and I've said in an earlier message, this is cherry picking the details to fit a preconceived answer. So you found a couple things that said, oh, that made you think of, oh, helicopter might be a helicopter, and the problem is almost never does God describe things in that kind of a way. He describes them from their meanings, as I said before. But people want to interpret it in terms of physical descriptions of things, and that's, like I said, only once in the Bible do I ever know that happens. And then so people they match up a couple little details, and then they begin cherry picking the other details to see if they can fit them into this idea they've come up with, and they ignore everything else that contradicts and conflicts with that. And that's just not the way to understand prophecy. So I'll give you a clue to understand this. What does a locust mean in the first century? And I'll give you even an example of that. If you said, um, that woman's family are like locusts, what would you be saying? You would be saying something that has meaning to it. You have meaning when you say that. What is that meaning, and how do you apply that to what's being said here?